was in grad school, and I already had a pretty good reading knowledge of the Kennedy assassination and had my doubts, but in 1975 when I was in grad school, the Zapruder film was shown on Good Night America for the first time. You know, a lot of people nod their heads and say that they saw it the weekend of the assassination, older people, and well, they didn't. It wasn't shown for 12 years, which is incredulous, but that's true. And in seeing it, it got my feathers up. And so when I went back to my doctoral studies and doctoral dissertation, and should have been spending more time on that, I would cruise over to the floor that had the volumes of the Warren Commission and the other books, and got into it in a big way. Went to Dallas for the first time and had been there many, many times since. And that's where it started. Then I took it to the classroom. When I had done everything but my dissertation and went to Massachusetts, I proposed a class on American political assassinations, and the history department approved it there. And so I taught that for a couple of years, both at Western New England and then at a community college in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And then that led to being on a few committees and doing some consulting. Some of it was interesting, some of it was kind of bizarre. My consulting with Nova was very bizarre in that they ignored literally everything I showed them, and they had already had a preconceived plan to go with their quote scientific unquote program. This is a program that aired about 30 years ago. And I understand they got another one that they're doing, which, traveling, I haven't seen anything on television here the last few days, but I suspect the same thing will happen here in 2013. So I've been lecturing for 38 years, basically. Yeah. Most Americans believe that there's more than a lone assassin. The polls have always showed that. Now the polls are not as wide to that effect as they used to be, because the media, particularly what you're seeing here in the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months, is overwhelmingly saying that the Warren Commission had it right, that Oswald did it. They don't look at the details of, particularly what I will zero in tonight here at Bridgewater, is the medical evidence. I really believe the key to the Kennedy assassination is looking what the Dallas doctors identified in Parkland Hospital while they were working on President Kennedy. And if President Kennedy's body had remained there and the autopsy had been done there, a lot of these unanswered questions might have been answered. But everything changes when that body goes to Bethesda Naval Hospital and a very incomplete autopsy is done. And then the Warren Commission is formed after there had been a couple resolutions in both houses of Congress to do congressional or senatorial investigations. President Johnson gets a special commission set up, and from there we really have a lot of unanswered questions for almost the entire 50 years now. Yeah, I really think there was a conspiracy to kill the president, and obviously start with gunshots from two different directions. I don't put Oswald on the 6th floor, and I'll show that tonight, the reasons why. The conspiracy to me is a triangle. If you drew a triangle and you put the map of Cuba right in the middle of that triangle, the three corners are organized crime, CIA, and anti-Castro activity, not pro-Castro activity. And all three really irritated at President Kennedy, going back to the Bay of Pigs, further ticked off because of what he chose to do for the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thank goodness he pursued that route. And I think when people want to really carefully look at why the president was assassinated, you really need to read or listen to his June '63 commencement speech at American University, where he was calling for peace in our time, not for all time, but peace, not peace in our time like Neville Chamberlain said in 1938, but peace for all time. Very powerful, important speech, but it ticked off those parts of the conspiracy, the three parts that I mentioned. There also is a key to this, in that the aftermath of the assassination, there had to be instantaneous endorsement of the Warren Commission, and there was. When you go back, students can go back and look at the editorials in September of '64. All the newspapers were endorsing the Warren Commission, and the one-volume report, the 26 volumes of exhibits and testimony, didn't come out for 18 months to 2 years later. And only so many sets of those are made, and usually those went to large colleges and universities. So that's the meat and potatoes of the Warren Commission, is looking at the exhibits and testimony. And that's when the first critiques start coming out in '66 and '67. And then we had another investigation a lot of people don't remember, when Congress investigated in between '76 and '78. They concluded from their evidence that they had reason to believe there was a conspiracy, and turned over certain pieces of evidence to the Justice Department. The Justice Department has chosen not to do any follow-up on anything that they turned over. And so that was 34 years ago when they finished their work. So you would think that with the importance of the office, and also the importance of President Kennedy, at least in my lifetime, the most popular president we ever had, that he deserves a full, complete, and honest investigation. And none of these investigations, by the way, really had anybody representing Lee Harvey Oswald's interests, i.e. a defense attorney. Well, you go back to my time period. As an 8th grader, we got this shocking weekend series of events, but then when you look at the 4.5 years that I had remaining to graduate from high school, we had the Vietnam War, we had uprisings in our cities, we had cities on fire from protests, and we had the civil rights movement, we had student unrest, then we had more assassinations. Medgar Evers was assassinated before President Kennedy's assassination. Right after President Kennedy had made a very important civil rights speech, he was trying to push new legislation, which wasn't passed until the Johnson administration. And then Bobby Kennedy, actually when I was a senior in high school, as president of my class, we were setting up for the prom on a Thursday night. Martin Luther King was assassinated. That was a pretty scary night, because we didn't know where we were living, whether there would be massive protests, and South Albany might be in flames. Luckily, Robert Kennedy, who was campaigning for president in Indiana at the time, for the Indiana primary, was in Indianapolis, got on nationwide television, called for calm and restraint, and in the rain of Indianapolis, and said very quietly how he knew what it was like for a white man to shoot and kill his brother, his loved one, and that was very, very powerful, moving, but it also calmed people in the United States. Less than 2 months later, he was gone with his assassination. So JFK's, if we knew the whole truth there in its total entirety, might explain some of the other things that happened, not only in the '60s but in the '70s. And today's students, as grade schoolers, as elementary school kids, remember 9/11, and I think a lot of kids now will also remember very vividly the Boston Marathon bombings. So my parents remember Pearl Harbor. So these are events that caused trauma to all of us, but we also, I keep thinking the importance of finding the truth, because it's versed very well in America the Beautiful, the song. America, America, God, mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul with self-control, thy liberty in law. That second verse of that song resounds in my head all the time.